Welcome, everybody, to an ISM webinar. You can tell we're still getting used to the setup. My name's Sam Titsell-Norrish. I'm a founder of Independent Sponsor News. We are the news and data platform for the industry, and we've just got started this year. We have big ambitions, and the best part of what we do is the huge tailwinds behind the independent sponsor segment. And it really is one of the fastest growing corners of the market. At the moment, we are estimating somewhere in the range of 1,600 to 1,800 active independent sponsors in North America alone. And that's roughly double what it was just 5 years ago. And the performance data backs this up. There was a study recently released that showed findings that really are quite striking. Firstly, independent sponsor deals delivered a median IRR of nearly 24%, and that compared to just an 18.5% benchmark for comparable buyout transactions from traditional managers. And that's roughly 29% higher on a relative basis. On a talent side of things, we're seeing a ton of high quality people flooding into this space, establishing independent sponsors just like you guys. And 88% of independent sponsors today come from private equity backgrounds. 2/3 of those are serial sponsors with 3 or more closed deals. So it really is a real and professionalizing industry, and it's professionalizing fast. It's not a fallback strategy. This is not the funless sponsor environment that it was before. This is a very real part of the market with deal volume by number of deals higher than private equity itself. But all that said, getting started and building an independent sponsor, it's still not obvious, and it's still not for the faint-hearted. Structuring your first deal, setting up the team, raising the capital, and doing all of that without a track record in this entity is a lot to get right early on. And so as Ed and I, who go way back, Ed helped me raise my first fund, we're talking, we thought it would be good to unpack, using Ed's expertise, just how to do that. And so over the next 30, 40 minutes, we're going to talk through this step by step. We're going to cover exactly how to structure your first deal, to get the legal setup right, how to position yourself credibly when you don't have that fund or track record behind you, and how to build capital provider LP relationships from scratch. We're going to get into sourcing, diligence, getting a deal to close, and we're going to talk about what it takes from doing one deal to building that repeatable platform as you go. But most importantly, it's not going to be me that does the talking. I've already done enough of that. So today, I am joined by my great friend and someone who's spent his entire career really building and backing emerging managers, Ed Stubbings. And Ed is the founder of the Global Emerging Manager Institute. He's also the founder of Turnian Alternatives. That's a GP stake investor and advisor that seeds and launches and institutionalizes private markets firms. And before that, when I first met Ed, he was a member of the founding team of Beartooth Advisors, and that was a placement platform, merchant bank that was acquired by Houlihan Lokey. And prior to that, he was at UBS. So he's got a broad range of experiences. And if you're not blushing, Ed, you should be. You've had an extraordinary career, and you're going to share all of those nuggets that you've learned along the way with us now. So welcome, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. No, I appreciate it, and congratulations for everything that you've built so far at ISN. I kind of feel that, it's been only a handful of months, but it's gone very quickly, and I'm already getting kind of inbounds from independent sponsors about ISN. So clearly, the network effect is doing its job.
Good. Well, we're pleased to hear it. Thank you, and thank you for your support. We want to demystify the industry. We want to be the ultimate source of data and truth for independent sponsors, and help provide access to services and capabilities and knowledge that independent sponsors need to be successful. It's a privilege to do that. But let's start talking a little bit about the type of independent sponsors we're seeing. Who are actually becoming independent sponsors today?
So, as you mentioned at the start, the independent sponsor industry really grew out of what used to be called the fundless sponsor market. And there was, for a long time, a bit of a negative perception around fundless sponsors. It was seen that maybe there was an established manager that was struggling raising fund two or fund three. They'd do a few deals outside of a fund structure, and then maybe they'd get back to doing doing fund structures. I think that's really changed. And as investment professionals at established firms are thinking about, well, how do I get started and create my own investment platform? All of a sudden, the last 5, 10 years, there's now this on-ramp to doing, whether it's pre-fund deals or actually increasingly just staying as an independent sponsor and investing deal by deal. That there's this amazing on-ramp for investors to actually go after the pipeline that they that yeah, of attractive opportunities they see in the market. Um, I think that's the majority of people in the market are investment professionals who, whether at a kind of mid or senior level, and actually increasingly I'm seeing people who are kind of principal MD level investment professionals who would probably be, in the old model of raising a fund, traditional wisdom would be, well, look, you really need kind of more years or more track record under your belt. With this new model, if the pipeline is of sufficiently high quality, you don't have to have 15 years of partner experience to go and do that. But the other interesting category of independent sponsor are the kind of operators turned investors, where I've seen increasingly there are teams where it might only be one or two investment professionals, but then a handful of operating partners who really understand how to build value at whether it's an industrial services company or whatever it happens to be. And so I think that will also become an avenue for people kind of outside of the investment industry traditionally, but who have the expertise to build these companies. They can sort of pick a thesis and build in that sector.
And the world we're moving into, it's becoming more and more attractive, particularly thinking through the acquisition of halo assets, heavy assets, and essential service type businesses that have a lower technology obsolescence. It feels like in the fast moving world where we don't know what technology is going to change the landscape we're in on a year to year basis, that's a safer place to be. But is it getting easier or harder to launch as an independent sponsor? We've seen it grow a lot.
It's
Easier or harder?
strangely, yeah, strangely, it's both. I think it's becoming easier insofar as, I mean, the first independent sponsor full firm setup that I worked on was back in 2022, where we actually were thinking, do we go the fund route? Do we go the independent sponsor route? This was in Europe where it was much less established as a model. And we ended up saying, well, look, we've got the pipeline. Let's go and speak to some investors. And we started out speaking to the kind of the usual suspects. So these are the groups like whether it's Harbourvest or Adam Street, who they already have established co-investment programs, and they were sort of interested in expanding those co-investment programs beyond. That initial ecosystem has expanded hugely. So now you have thousands of family offices, high net worth individuals. It's not so much kind of pensions and insurance companies. I think there's still that element of this is a very fast moving and new type of strategy. So I think there's been a little bit of reticence, but there are a huge number of investors now who can back independent sponsors. I think it's becoming easier from a capital point of view. But because, and as you noticed in your introduction, the size of the market has effectively doubled in a handful of years. And so what you're seeing is the vast majority, and there was some survey data recently, I forget where from exactly, but which was saying that the vast majority of independent sponsors are kind of deal zero. So they're still hunting for that first deal. And there is a fair amount of, I wouldn't call it fatigue, but there's cautiousness from LPs where if an independent sponsor comes to you and says, hey, I'm the next big thing, I've set up my firm, there's an element of, okay, I'm happy to build a relationship, but I get pitched hundreds of times a month. I kind of need to see the breadcrumbs being laid about what an institutional firm setup looks like, and then show that you've got the high quality deal.
Um, you've just sort of triggered a conversation I had last week in New York. I had coffee with a friend, and They're at a mid to large size manager, MD level, and had a great career so far. In fact, this question's for you, Cameron. If you're on, you might be. And they were talking about wanting to make the jump, wanting to be an independent sponsor, and not knowing where to start, what the first step was. And in my mind, it was find a deal and have a reason to make the jump. But it's not quite that simple, I don't think. So when you're sat in the seat, a comfortable seat, maybe in a GP, what is that first real step you have to take?
So I get pitched a lot by investment professionals at established managers. And clearly it's not a kind of a full pitch of can we do this, but it's almost like a request for an audit of their fact pattern. So they want to know, look, I've done these deals over the course of my career. I see these opportunities in the market. What do you think? And it's really tough to hypothesize what that firm might look like with an investment professional who's still in place. And so I think the very first step is to decide this is for me. This is a journey that I want to be on, because there are so many people who play with the idea, think about it, and then ultimately decide, it's not for them. The best time of discovering it's not for you is before you've made the decision and before you've told anyone, because it is a long, tough road, or at least can be.
It's hard to unwind resignation, I guess, as well.
Well, that's right. But even if, you've been on the road for 6 months, you'll have burned some working capital. You'll have tried to get this thing off the ground. I think it's not that. I think you just need to know that, okay, I've spoken with my family. I want to go on this journey for a year or so, and potentially through, deals falling apart and LPs who had previously answered your phone calls saying that deal's not for them. Sort of an extension of the point, though, is a reason not to do it, which I don't think people talk about enough. But one of the worst reasons, I think, to start an independent sponsor, if I can phrase it that way, is because you're frustrated that a deal got turned down. I would say that is 50, 60% of the.
At IC.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, yeah.
so the inbounds that I get from people who have said, got this fantastic deal, just turned down at IC. I'm so frustrated. I've been working with this management team for 5 years. It's not that. I mean, that might actually be a very positive fact pattern for the first deal in any case, but it's sort of the equivalent of rage quitting your established manager to then start down this very long, tough path of setting up your own firm. I think it's just what I would say to people, and there's plenty of people who, for all the right reasons, have had deals turned down at IC, but it's take a pause. Is it that the IC is never going to see your perspective on a part of the market that you uniquely have the ability to unlock? Or is it just someone on the IC said no and that's frustrating and you have a response to that? So yeah, I think it's kind of be sure. That's what I would, really have a moment of thinking carefully about starting the journey, because it's tough to unwind, as you say.
So if you're watching and tuning in here, and you're thinking about it, no rage resignations is
Right.
Ed's advice. No rage quitting. That's probably not the number one takeaway for your LinkedIn post after this, but it's good advice nonetheless. So when you do resign, not in rage, with rationale, and you begin to build, and an independent sponsor suggests it's a solo business, but it's not. It's no different to building an investment firm. You're just building the capital source and structure differently, um, and leaner typically. Who do you want around you? How should you think about the different parts of the value chain that maybe you as an investment professional don't fulfill?
So it's certainly possible to be a solo GP, and there are plenty of independent sponsors who I actually came across an independent sponsor the other day. Had this really interesting model, which is effectively they are the firm, so they are the investment capability. But then for each deal that they do in a number of subsectors, they have two or three operating partners who it's almost like the organization has an organic quality to it, where for each of the deals that they pursue, they form the team around them. But my point is that at the organization, at the independent sponsor itself, you can run pretty lean. Um, but as you rightly say, it's not just a solo effort from start to finish. And I would categorize the team in two ways. It's kind of internal team and external team. The internal team is co-founding team members, and that doesn't need to be another partner level person the same as the main founder. It can be a principal level person or someone who just supports you on the journey. I think having some, despite me saying that there are plenty of people who are solo GPs or run very lean, I think that there are plenty of LPs who will require more than one investment team member just because of what happens if someone gets ill or they have to, I don't know, take some time out of work or whatever it happens to be. There needs to be that element of someone else needs to be able to steer the ship. So I think it's have some sense about who the other internal investment team members could be. I think compared to a fund structure, the internal ops hire is, this is going to sound a bit controversial. I think it's a bit less important at an independent sponsor, or at least can be delayed a little. Whereas if I was setting up a fund manager today, I'd want that fund manager to know pretty early on, okay, who's the person quarterbacking internal firm finance and compliance and all the kind of the ops functions. But then coming to the external part of the equation, I think having a team around you of advisors, and when people kind of hear me say that, and I've had this response, it's like, okay, well, that sounds expensive. Like, what does that actually mean in practice? I think it's just knowing who the group of people will be who, as you're starting this journey, will be keeping you on track and keeping you honest about what you actually need in terms of legal setup, your firm and SPV operations, reporting, insurance provision, even IT services. It's all of these like little things. You may not be signing retainers on day one, but you need to know fairly early on, okay, when I have a legal matter, I'm going to be going to this firm. But when I have a capital raising matter, I'm going to be going to this placement agent who can help me raise capital.
Let's fast forward a little bit to you started your independent sponsor. You found some deals, you built a pipeline, and you've decided you're going to progress the deal through the whole way, and you've got to go start raising some money. What are the classic mistakes that trip people up early in that capital sourcing part of the journey?
There's one mistake that really stands out, and that's the kind of the menu approach to deal opportunities. And I get why this happens, but the independent sponsor sort of says, well, there's three things that I could advance. I don't know necessarily which one is going to get the best response from LPs. And what I don't want to do is burn a load of fees and time diligencing an opportunity and then discover that I don't get any traction with LPs. And so they sort of show the pipeline to an LP and say, effectively, does anything jump out at you as being interesting? Hoping that the LP says, well, deal number 3 looks fantastic. If you were to pursue that, now there's a way of socializing a pipeline and saying, look, these are some things that are coming. Obviously happy to keep you updated if there are any particular subsectors of it. It's a subtle difference between saying there's really nothing that we are leaning into as a real thesis, but here are a load of ideas. That's very, very different to, we've got an opportunity that is coming. This is the timeline. It's still early. We have these other things that we find interesting, but they're a little further out. I think one makes it sound like you don't have conviction in which of those deals could be your first deal, let's say. And the other situation is where you have conviction around something. And to answer your question specifically, I think it's when you're going to LPs, it is okay to have general introductions, but kind of be wary because you can have many introductions with LPs where it sounds fantastic. Oh, great that you're setting up your own firm. We'd love to see your deal flow. Yeah, absolutely. We can sign support letters, capital support letters. And yeah, sure, we're happy to share diligence costs. All of those things are really easy to say, but it's only when you have an opportunity that you can articulate, okay, this is coming. We're in the middle of desktop DD. We're going to be signing and starting the process of FDD on this date. That's when you're really, and indeed when you're in exclusivity on an
Mm.
opportunity, that's really when you're going to get LPs allocate time. And going back to the point about there being a lot more noise in the market, if you're a fund of fund or a very lean independent sponsor backing LP team, the biggest frustration is that you spend a load of time on deals that aren't in exclusivity, they don't get there, there's no conviction. You want to be efficient with your time. So to your point about what's the right step or what's the right process around LP engagement, I think it's identifying that point where, yes, it's fine to kind of warm up LPs and make introductions and know who you're going to contact, but then also know a process is coming. We're now going to start engaging a bit more thoughtfully about how to raise capital for that opportunity.
And well, we've got actually, it's on this topic. We've got Ali Nanji, who I believe is tuning in here from the United Arab Emirates today. Um, Here's a question that's somewhat related to this, and unsurprisingly, given where in the world Ali is, it's a family office related question, maybe a lived experience. He says, when a family office asks you why you, why this deal, why now, what's the single strongest proof point you've seen an independent sponsor use that isn't the prior fund track record? And does sector specific operating experience matter, or does nothing substitute for that deal track record in an LP's eyes?
Well, the best proof is proof, right? The best, or the closest neighbor to saying that you can deliver a return is to say, here are the things that I've done that have delivered that return. But I get the core of the question is, how do you articulate, sort of absent whether or not there is a track record? How do you, well, what's the right messaging to convince a family office or any investor? I think it's two things. It's specialization and then positioning yourself as a specialist. Again, a bit of a odd phrasing, but specialization is uh, as it relates to your firm identity, be different in the way that you are trying to change the world through the investments that you're making. Very grand
Yeah.
statement, but effectively it's like we are trying to decarbonize industrial services in the GCC. Like that's a kind of a big, this is who we are, this is why we're here, it's important. We want you to sort of be on that journey with us. And then I would say, so that's the kind of specialization of pick a part of the market. And then in terms of being a specialist, what I mean by that is in the way that you go and pursue that strategy, show that you are the right group to back to unlock that opportunity. So, yes, we want to decarbonize industrial services in the GCC, and members of our team have spent 3 decades working in industrial services companies in the GCC. And a member of our team was the head of sustainability at Aramco or whatever it happens to be, some kind of reason that your particular way, it's like you frame it as here's the opportunity, big picture, and this is what the firm's been set up. But then the team on the ground has the ability to unlock that. And when you have those two big sort of powerful anchors, then when you say, and then here's the pipeline, it really becomes then the third leg of the stool where you've got
Mm.
I mean, I talk about it as vision, principles, and strategy as a different way of describing this. It's like you've got to have the big picture about the world that you're trying to change. Then you've got to have the practical, like this is what we do, and then the pipeline is almost the where the rubber hits the road. That's the bit that people are going to back. That's the reason that they're not going to just say that's an interesting idea. what's next.
And let's so you've got the deal you want to do. In my mind, the first thing I would do is think through, okay, what's the profile of the deal? What type of capital sources are going to be most appropriate for a deal like this? Um, both, and if you're in North America, perhaps the type of fund structure. Is it an SPIA fund? What's the credit profile of it? But when it comes to the equity component, would you always recommend using a placement agent if this wasn't your wheelhouse, it was your first deal? And how would you think about a placement agent as it relates to deal size, fees on the placement agent?
The placement agent ecosystem has actually been quite slow to, I mean, that, for many years it was really just Triago, now part of Houlihan Lokey, who were the specialists in the space. I think a lot of groups are relatively new entrants. That's not at all to say that that they're not going to do a great job, but it's more that this is still a rapidly growing part of the market, and so it's not I mean, in the fund landscape, for example, it is a completely valid question, which is, does your placement agent cover the Midwest? Does it cover the West Coast? What is your view on covering LPs in Southeast Asia or whatever, whatever the region is? That's much more of a valid question than it is in the independent sponsor space. So I think there's an element of judge those placement agents, and a good example of a good or a placement agent that's been making waves would be a group like Aviara, who they've had a fantastic recent record the last 12-24 months
How do you spell
of
that in?
Aviara, Aviara.
Yeah.
A guy called Peter who runs it. He's a great resource within the independent sponsor ecosystem. And I think groups like that will, success will beget success there. But going back to your question, which is, do you really need a placement agent? I think the answer to that depends on a couple of things. Firstly, what are you trying to what does the deal look like? Because I think that'll determine who you go to for those particular opportunities. For example, a very small, 2 million EBITDA opportunity in Texas, it might be that if you're from Texas and you have a local ecosystem of high net worth and family office investors there, indeed, there's a independent sponsor I know down that way of the world who they just have a high net worth group of investors, I think 40 or 50 high net worth investors, and they just regularly kind of pass the hat and get those deals done. I think if you don't have that kind of fact pattern, or you're looking at deals that are 30, 40, 50 million, it's just not going to be possible for you to put together these kind of unwieldy syndicates of investors, or certainly it's going to be a lot harder. And in that case, I would ask, okay, if I don't know who the 200, 300 family offices are that I'm going to go to for this opportunity, how do I get introduced to them? And that's where a placement agent could be very helpful. One final note just on the placement side is the independent sponsor landscape is unique, or it's very, very different from the fund landscape in that debt providers will often have they'll be open to providing equity as well, which is another kind of interesting feature of the independent sponsor landscape compared to, let's say, in the fundraising space, where you wouldn't typically have a debt provider who commits to a fund and scale.
I think it goes without saying, most people here are probably thinking it. Maybe I shouldn't say it out loud, but I will. The placement agent landscape has a very broad spectrum of quality. And I think spending time with the right people, you are stapling your reputation to an
Mm.
advisor who's out there marketing you, and making sure you do it with the right level of reputability and
Mhm.
credibility as a young independent sponsor, I think is very important.
Sorry, well, I missed the question. Just
No, no, no. More of a statement. More of a statement. I've heard some horror stories of people working with placement agents that promise the world, charge a large retainer, and barely show up. So it's
oh, yeah, that's definitely a risk. Look, I think I actually just had a conversation with a client today about it's more of a strategic advisory relationship, but they're considering hiring a placement agent. And we spent a lot of time on the engagement letter where, to your point, I think it's all about what are people incentivized to do. And I think the challenge with retainers, and I work on my advisory side of my business, I work on a retainer model as well. But the risk is that the alignment is there's an element of misalignment because the advisor wants to take a lot of time and make a lot of introductions, and they're really, working for a long period of time is very valuable for them. Whereas I think obviously when you structure things that are success weighted, I think that's really where you can, where a placement agent who backs themselves can really distinguish themselves. And again, going back to the Aviara point or some of the other placement agents out there, I think when they sort of really know where the capital is for a particular deal, they will happily say, sure, I'll work on a commission weighted or a commission only basis. But that might be a fairly expensive or a full fee rate. So in the fund ecosystem, you might spend 1.5%, 2% as a placement fee for new capital. That could be 2.5%, 3%,
Yeah.
3.5% if you're raising capital on a direct basis. So
I want to remind everyone watching, if you have a question, please do submit it in the box below, and we'll get to those as they're submitted. So please do throw them in. There's nothing Ed won't answer as long as it's appropriate. And then question really from my side, Ed, on service provision. So service providers play a critical role in this industry. Some industries, they're the necessary evil. This industry, they provide infrastructure, support, and capability you can't necessarily afford without deal fees to pay for it in this instance. I sat down with a friend, an independent sponsor friend, not long ago, who mapped out quite literally on the back of a napkin the workflow of what he does as an independent sponsor: thesis, originate, diligence, underwrite, so on. Value creation, the different components and ways he thought about value creation, all the way through to exit. And then he had structured a sequencing of different service providers along the way. Some of those service providers were catch-alls. A good example would be Blue Wave, the value creation marketplace for private equity, where you can go and find any provider of the best quality vetted value creation capabilities in that marketplace for value creation. So that's like a one-stop shop. But you need to have your specific service providers along the way, whether that be Q of E service providers or it be financial diligence or so on. How should an independent sponsor think about finding the right service providers for the part of the transaction they need?
I think it's unfortunately there's an element of you either have to, this is going to sound like a sort of a negative comment, but you either have to kind of know the people who provide those services, or you're going to end up sort of meeting a lot of people and making a determination based on capabilities. But I mean, one of the big things that we tried to do with the Global Emerging Manager Institute is have sponsors, service providers affiliated with the Institute who we'd kind of been through these processes multiple times, and we could sort of tick the box alongside them and say, yes, they do structuring of the management company, or in the case of an insurance broker, yes, you're going to have a productive conversation about D&O insurance or whatever it happens to be. So,
Yeah.
so you're not wasting time on, great, I've had 4 calls now with 4 different insurance brokers, and none of them do services for independent sponsors or private equity firms. So I think my overarching comment would be go for specialists rather than incumbent relationships. I mean, as it relates to selecting service providers, one of the bigger mistakes that I've seen is you'll have someone leave a large private equity firm and they will have these pre-existing relationships with law firms or administrators or even banking providers where the assumption will be great. I know the organization, I know the associates there. They'll be delighted to pick up new business. I'll just go and use them when I'm an independent sponsor. And the reality is, you will waste a lot of money and time effectively paying for that team to develop their capability in that space. Whereas, in the case of, I know we both know Lippis Matthias on the legal side. They are real specialists within the independent sponsor space. So they'd be an example of a group where they're not going to be appropriate for certain types of structures in certain types of countries, like for a large cap infrastructure fundraise in Asia. But for independent sponsor deal and firm structuring, I think it's much better going for specialists rather than trying to make an existing relationship fit.
100% agree wholeheartedly. And yeah, at ISN, we try to partner with and bring those specialists to the independent sponsors so that the independent sponsors don't have to fumble around in the dark, not knowing who's best. And we partner with them based on market feedback, frankly, who is best by reputation. We've got a question in from Lorimer. A great question, in fact. If a sponsor has closed deals using their own balance sheet rather than third-party capital, does that count as track record with future capital partners, and how would you present that?
I think it's more so it absolutely counts as track record. I think it depends a little more on, are those deals appropriate for the strategy that you're pursuing? So where I think it is less appropriate, and I've seen this, is that people have said, look, I'm going to pursue a healthcare buyout strategy where I'm looking to invest 20 to 40 million in majority stakes of healthcare companies. And then they point to a track record, which is, I've given 25K or 50,000 to a health tech startup, and I own 0.2% of the company. I think I assume that's not what's being thought of here. I think that as long as there's a link between the deals that have been done using your own capital and what your future track record will be, and obviously it's hugely helpful if the outcomes are great outcomes as well. Even if it's a different sector, the fact it's been a fantastic outcome and you've been able to kind of execute your model of, like, we've really worked with the management team, we've delivered a load of value for the underlying investor, which happens to be yourself, but we took a very disciplined approach and thought carefully about the exit route. And I think that it's almost like, what is the narrative that you're able to tell about that investment, regardless of who the underlying investor is?
Mm-hmm. We've got another question in around service providers, and I do think there's an exercise here, perhaps that ISN can go through, maybe in partnership with you, Ed, to put together a paper on how to think about service providers and maybe even some recommended names against each of these with specialty areas. But this question is, are there other accountants or lawyers that you think would be helpful for an independent sponsor deal? And I can take a first shot and throw you the ball, Ed, but the law firms have spent a lot of time building business development fly traps in this space. McGuire Woods is a good example. Good firm, good for independent sponsor deals. I was just talking to someone this morning who closed a deal yesterday. In fact, an ISN exclusive dropped today on a closed deal that McGuire Woods worked on. They have a good reputation. Lippis is an excellent firm. Their reputation stands out, and they're a little bit on the more appropriately priced end of the lawyer spectrum. On the accounting side, Cohn Resnick, I have a lot of time for. Fantastic firm, great culture, great people, full scope as well, all the way through to transaction, DD, and value creation support. So they would be at the top
Citrin
of. Yeah,
Citrin
another good one.
on the accounting side.
And they do some interesting research as well.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe we on the ISN side at least we take an action there to put something together on service provision. I think that could be very useful. Another question just in. Can you talk through how to most effectively manage deal fees? And how often have you seen either third parties roll dead deal fees until a dead deal is closed, or see equity partners agree to cover dead deal fees?
Hmm. I guess there's two bits to this. One is on deal fee. I mean, one interesting one of the more attractive pieces of the independent sponsor model is that deal fees or transaction fees are charged because the in a fund management model, these are typically borne by the GP, but it's just a feature of the independent sponsor landscape where LPs tend to at least contribute to these deal fees. So I know the question was more about broken deal fees. I'll come to that in a second. But in terms of making a credible argument about what is the right transaction fee for an independent sponsor deal, the advice that I always give is be as transparent as possible because the where you're going to be most at risk of being negotiated down is where you just throw out a number. Hey, here's 2%, 3%. That's where market is. That's what we're going to charge. Yes, if it's the hottest deal in the world and your book's three times covered, then maybe you'll defend that. But I think it's a much more solid argument to say it's 3% because there was a real environmental risk around this one part of the company. We commissioned McKinsey or whoever to do some really in-depth environmental DD. Cost a lot of money, but we did it because it's really important, and that's being baked into the deal fee. I think that you'll be able to defend the transaction fee on that basis, I think. As it relates to sharing of broken deal costs, it's a tricky one because you're trying to convince an LP that to take risk with you, and they're trying to get to a point of liking you and trusting you enough that them extending that is not just them giving away something for nothing. Why would they why would they agree to share broken deal fees? Well, if it's a fantastic deal in their sector, let's say it's a family office that's a, I don't know, food and beverage family office, and you have a really exciting pipeline of food and beverage deals, they might want to look at those opportunities almost like a kind of co-GP. They may not be in the driver's seat with or in the passenger seat, but they may be thinking about it as we're kind of co-underwriting this. I think in those kind of situations where they really want to lead the deal and be the majority of the equity check, I think that one of the balances or the negotiations is look, if we do let you effectively take this entire deal yourself, if indeed you do want to go ahead with the deal, we have to agree that if for whatever reason the deal falls through, there's some equitable sharing of deal opportunities. And then I think the other scenario is where, and this is a lot easier if you are an established independent sponsor, if you've done two or three deals, and this was actually the case with a European independent sponsor. They had a huge amount of traction in there. I think it was their third or their fourth deal, and in those cases were able to not quite. It wasn't take advantage on terms, but it was they were able to be a bit more robust with. Well, look, if you do want to be part of this deal process, we have to agree that there's some sharing of costs, and there were letters signed to that effect. But I think if you don't have those dynamics and it's your first deal, I think it's really tough, and I think it's just a case of be really careful with incurring costs, and maybe indeed think about recovering some of those costs over a period of time as you close future deals. And there are ways of structuring that so you can do that.
Thank you. We have probably five-ish more minutes, and I wanted to remind everyone, Ed has the definitive 25-point checklist for starting an independent sponsor. We're going to be sharing that with everyone after this call, so it'll hit your inbox later today. And there's a ton of awesome stuff in there. A lot of stuff in there putting me to shame hadn't thought about. So looking forward to you guys getting that. Next question we've got. What are some ideas on structuring GP independent sponsor seeding with family offices,
Mm,
i.e., working capital? And you and I have spent a lot of time on GP stake
yeah.
related stuff historically. It's one of your sweet spots. What are you seeing in the independent sponsor space here?
Highly negotiated. There is almost no templated way of partnering. One of the questions I get most commonly is, I don't have any prior relationships. How possible is it for me to go from sort of 0 to 60 on a GP seed? I think it's very difficult because particularly where your independent sponsor has zero AUM, which of course many are in that situation, it's really tough to convince someone to ascribe any kind of valuation to a firm that has zero AUM and likely only yourself and a very small initial team. It becomes much, much easier, even with a single deal closed, to say, this is now that we've closed this deal, we have the following things in our pipeline. We're interested in exploring a more of a strategic relationship. I'll come on to the structure in a second, but so I think that you're much more likely to get those deals confirmed once you get some traction in your organization. One thing that I always would advise is, if you have a deal, and say your first deal, just for argument's sake, is $40 million, that's the equity required to close the deal. And you're speaking with a family office, like going back to the food and beverage example, love the sector, love food and beverage, like the economics of the deal. Is there a route to you saying to that family office, so it's 40 million for the deal, but what would 41 million as a complete investment package look like, where this is going to be the benefit to your return because of the share of management company economics? And here's a little piece on what the trajectory of the firm looks like. I think that's a pretty positive fact pattern. And again, pick your audience for that. That's not something to kind of go out with broadly on day one. But I have seen strategies like that get traction. So, and then just very lastly on structure. Um, so fundamentally, without going into the micro detail, you're either giving away permanent equity, or there's a revenue share type of balance where you're giving away management company revenue for a period of time. And it's a way of kind of sweetening an underlying investment return, but it's not like long-term equity being given away in your firm. I think what it comes down to, just as a kind of a simple summary, is this a partner that you want aligned with your firm for 2 decades? And that should be the mentality, because
Yes.
if it is, like, let's say, for example, it's a $5 billion family office that's the food and beverage family, and you're a food and beverage you have a food and beverage investment strategy. It might be the perfect strategic fit, and there could be 20 things you do together. And it's a good way of binding those organizations together. So I think I would tailor the structure based on the underlying investor.
Makes good sense. Question here that I've thought about a lot. In fact, as it relates to people I've spoken with in the industry. Um, we often talk about the archetypal independent sponsor being someone who's been an investor in a GP. What advice do you have for someone who's building more of an operations track record, who wants to become an independent sponsor, someone who's been an operator and part of a management team, maybe in private equity, but not on the deal side?
I would say it is start to define what it is about your approach to the way that you have run businesses that is repeatable, uh, has delivered the outcomes that you've been associated with, because that will ultimately be what you're selling. Again, the advantage of the independent sponsor model is, if you're an operator, because you're not putting together a portfolio and running highly large investment evaluation screening processes internally, you're more, once you find an opportunity, you're then bringing that opportunity to a group of investors. I think it's possible for if you've defined that model, the second thing I would say is go and find an opportunity that is the kind of the next breadcrumb in the line of I've done these two prior things as CEO. I've now found another roll up to do in a similar or the same space. I'm gonna go again. I want to find a partner to sort of sit alongside me. I think that's the right strategy. The one caveat that I would say is have a think about what your blind spots are as well, because if it's immediately, let's say, for example, that individual is a great operator, great industrialist, for want of a better word, but for better or worse, they're just not a financial, they've always relied on a CFO or someone to kind of sit with them to do the more quantitative aspects of the role. Just you're going to get that question. So it's if you are an operator, just make sure that you're not completely neglecting the aspects of the role which are more quantitative or finance oriented.
Thanks, Ed. And I think we're going to wrap up with a final question. Ed, I'm going to ask you this question to give everyone a little bit of context about a part of your professional life that you are deeply passionate about, the Global Emerging Manager Institute. So, what does it actually do for independent sponsors specifically? They're emerging managers of the
Yeah.
they define it really in many ways. How should people that are independent sponsors think about getting involved?
Well, the Global EMI was, I mean, when I set it up in July 2024, the concept wasn't let's create another event series. I mean, there are obviously many event series now for independent sponsors out there. The idea was there are people out there who are early in their journeys, and that's everything from the kind of the ideation phase that we talked about right at the start, the kind of the potential rage quitters or more thoughtful quitters, all the way through to people who are closing their first, second, third deal and are now looking for what does the future of this organization look like? And indeed, that there are plenty of independent sponsors who have now graduated from being emerging to they've now done three, four, or five deals, and they would consider themselves as kind of growing out of that space. But I saw the kind of the provision of these three pillars of content, community, and capital as really lacking for both direct deal investors, independent sponsors, but also for fund managers. And so everything that we do is kind of supporting that goal. And for independent sponsors specifically, we have a ton of resources, 47,000 words of resources on the site itself. We're creating a course which will drop in October, November time, which will be all about how to launch an independent sponsor, how to launch a fund manager. And then all the events, we do 10 events a year around the world. And our upcoming summit, which is November 19th in New York, if you go to the Global EMI site, you can find your way to the events page. But that has an independent sponsor track as part of like a sort of a dedicated room where all that we're covering is the stuff that we've been talking about today, how to build best in class, how to get funded, and how to kind of go beyond and create something of lasting value.
We're looking forward to that a great deal. You're going to find independent sponsor news there in force. Ed, firstly, a big thank you for sharing all of your brain power with us and nearly 2 decades worth of experience in this space. And this space evolves every day at the moment. I'm sure when we come back together to discuss similar topics, maybe in 12 months' time, the world will have moved further on. One of the ways ISN is capturing that change is through surveying the market. We will be sharing a survey with the independent sponsor community. There will be a number of benefits for those who take the time to complete it, and we'll be bringing you into the inner circle as a thank you. But Ed, just a big thanks from me. Appreciate everything you do for the industry, and we'll be sending that 25-point checklist very soon.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Great to speak.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.